All right, so for a long time, sociology was all about the big picture, these giant social systems and structures. But today, we're flipping the telescope around. We're zooming all the way in to where society actually happens, in the everyday, face to face moments between people. This is micro-sociology, and it was a total game changer. It's this idea that we don't just live in society, we build it together, one interaction at a time. So, here's our game plan. First, we'll get into why this whole micro-sociology thing even started. Then, we'll jump into the heavy hitters, symbolic interactionism and Goffman's dramaturgy. We'll also touch on a couple of other really cool perspectives before we wrap it all up with the major critiques and, most importantly, the key lessons you should take away.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Before this, the dominant way of thinking, especially with theories like functionalism, was that society is this huge machine, and we're all just cogs in it, our behavior dictated by these big, abstract forces. Micro-sociology was basically a rebellion against that. It said, hold on, if you really want to understand society, you can't start from the top down. You have to start from the ground up with the actual interactions that create everything.
And this slide really nails the central conflict. Macro-sociology says things like social class or cultural norms are the cause of our behavior. But micro-sociology completely flips that script. It says, no, 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 those macro things are the result of our behavior. The economy, for instance, isn't some abstract force. It's just the sum total of billions of individual interactions, people making deals, buying coffee, negotiating salaries. It all starts at the micro level.
And this quote from Harold Garfinkel is just the perfect rallying cry for this whole revolution. I mean, cultural dopes. What a phrase. He's directly attacking the idea that we're all just mindless puppets, blindly following a script that society wrote for us. His point is that people are smart. We're constantly thinking, interpreting, and skillfully navigating our world. We are not dopes.
So, if you're going to challenge the old way, you need a new toolkit. And the first major one comes from symbolic interactionism. This is the framework pioneered by folks like G.H. Mead and Herbert Blumer that really gives us the language to talk about how we actively build our social reality. And what's so great is that Blumer basically boiled the entire theory down to 3 super intuitive principles. First, we act toward things based on the meaning those things have for us. Simple enough. Second, and this is key, that meaning isn't just there. It comes from our social interactions with other people. And third, these meanings aren't set in stone. We're constantly fiddling with them, interpreting and modifying them in every new situation we face. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because this perspective completely changes how we think about the self. According to Mead, you aren't just one single thing. You're more like a conversation. There's the me, which is your social self. It's how you imagine others see you, all the attitudes and roles you've picked up. But then there's the I. The I is your spontaneous, in-the-moment response to that me. It's that constant push and pull between them that really makes you, well, you. And get this social process is happening even when you're totally alone. When you're thinking something through, weighing your options, maybe asking yourself, what should I do here? You're actually having a conversation with yourself. You're pitting your impulsive I against the social me that's telling you what's expected. It's a social act, even inside your own head. Okay, so if symbolic interactionism gives us the theory, Erving Goffman gives us this incredibly powerful metaphor to see it all play out. A metaphor you've probably heard before, dramaturgy. The idea that all of life is a performance on a stage. Goffman's central claim is that in basically every social situation we're in, we are actors. And our main goal is something he calls impression management. We are constantly, actively working to shape how other people see us, to define the situation in a way that works for us. Think about a job interview versus hanging out with your friends. You're the same person, but you're putting on 2 very different performances, right? And of course, every performance needs a stage. Goffman calls this the setting. A place like a classroom or a courtroom isn't just a physical space. It comes with a built-in script, a set of expectations that shapes how we're supposed to act before we even say a word. Then you've got what Goffman calls the front. This is basically your costume, your props, your whole demeanor. It's the expressive gear you use to signal what your role is. A doctor's white coat, a police officer's uniform, a CEO's power suit. These are all part of the front that helps establish the performance. Now, a really crucial point here is that we're almost never acting alone. We rely on a team. Think about a waiter and a customer in a restaurant. They're both cooperating, playing their parts to make the performance of dining out work. If one of them messes up their lines, the whole scene can fall apart. To really test his ideas, Goffman looked at what happens when our ability to perform is completely taken away. He studied what he called total institutions, places like prisons, military barracks, or asylums. In these places, people are systematically stripped of their personal fronts, their clothes, their belongings, their names, and this process, he found, was devastating to a person's sense of self, which just proves how fundamental these everyday performances are to our identity. All right, let's quickly touch on two other micro perspectives that go even deeper into the weeds of everyday life. They're called phenomenology and ethnomethodology, and they're all about the unspoken, taken for granted background rules that make society possible. Phenomenology might sound intimidating, but it's really about our life world. That's the huge stock of common sense knowledge we all carry around. You know how to act in a grocery store without having to think about it, right? You're drawing on a typification or a mental recipe for that situation. Phenomenology studies that massive, invisible library of recipes we all use to get through the day. Ethnomethodology takes it a step further. It studies the actual methods people use to make sense of the world and create order. And a huge idea here is reflexivity. This is the mind-bending concept that when we describe a situation, we aren't just reporting on it, we're actively creating it. The way we talk about things actually shapes what those things become. And here is a fantastic example of reflexivity in action, this idea of doing gender. When someone sees a woman do something and says, well, of course, she's a woman, they're not just making an observation. They're drawing on a common sense assumption about gender to make the action understandable. And by doing that, they actually reinforce and reproduce that very idea of gender in that exact moment. They are literally doing gender. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. It's time to step back and look at the big picture. What are the limits of looking at the world this way? And what are the absolutely essential lessons that micro-sociology leaves us with? Now, of course, no theory is perfect. The big knock against micro-sociology is right there in the name. Maybe it's too micro. Critics will say, that's all fine and good, but what about power? What about inequality? What about the massive economic and political structures that constrain our lives? They argue that by focusing so much on cooperative, face-to-face interactions, this perspective can miss the bigger picture of conflict and domination. But even with those critiques, its legacy is profound. Micro-sociology teaches us that social order isn't some rigid thing that's imposed on us from above. It's a fragile, moment-to-moment achievement that we all accomplish together. It shows us that our identities aren't fixed things we have, but ongoing projects we do. And it reminds us that even the biggest systems are, at the end of the day, just people interacting with other people. And that really leaves us with one final, provocative thought. If all these theorists are right, if we're constantly creating social reality in every single moment, then you have to ask yourself, what performance are you putting on right now? By listening, by learning, by being a student, what version of yourself are you staging in this very moment?